Thank you, Chairman Gottfried and members of the Health Committee for holding this public hearing on this critically important issue, medical aid in dying. Throughout my 41 years in elected office, I kept my personal life as private as possible. However, I am so passionate about the need to provide people an end-of-life choice that I have openly shared the story of my parents for the past 2 years. Prior to my retirement from the Assembly in 2016, I was the first Republican member to sign on to the medical aid in dying legislation. At the final committee meeting in June, the bill was on the Assembly Health Committee agenda. I made an impromptu decision to share a very personal story about my family's painful history with end-of-life options. I knew the bill wouldn't get to the floor for a full debate prior to my retirement, so I wanted my colleagues to know my support of the bill is based on what two people I love very much went through, my mom and dad. My dad, Peter Lacey, died in 1994 of mesothelioma. He was an old school tough guy, a proud card-carrying IBEW member who worked major construction projects, including this legislative office building. At the end, he had excruciating pain, and even the great care from hospice and the prescribed morphine didn't touch the pain. Watching him suffer was too much for our family, especially my mother, to bear. 5 years later, my mom died following a series of strokes. She lost her ability to swallow and was being kept alive through a feeding tube. She was admitted to a nursing home, and as I entered her room on her third day there, she handed me a piece of paper. She'd drawn a line down the center of the page with headlines, "What I have lost and what I have left." She had lost much, including her will to live. Mom asked me to support her decision to remove the feeding tube. We consulted her minister, my dad's priest, her doctors, and the next day, the feeding tube was taken out. Over the weekend, a doctor other than her family practitioner ordered the feeding tube be reinserted. Again, Mom took out a piece of paper, which I still have at my home, and wrote in her beautiful penmanship, quote, "I want to die with dignity. I don't want the feeding tube put back in. Let me die, Edna Lacey." In case you wonder if my mother had her full mental capacity, I'll share some stories with you. She asked me to contact each of her designated pallbearers to come to the hospital so she could personally request their services. Stunned, they all said yes. About 4 or 5 days into our death watch, Mom said to me, "You Catholics don't know how to prepare a good funeral." She proceeded to pick out the hymns, psalms, and the people she wanted to participate in her funeral service. She then asked me if I was going to give a eulogy. I replied that I hadn't thought about it, as she wouldn't let me do a eulogy at Dad's funeral. Although the strokes had taken away her ability to smile, she said in her very difficult speech pattern and with a twinkle in her dimming eyes, "Yeah, but I don't have to listen to this one." Guess you know I prepared a eulogy. Without any food or even a sip of water, my mother lived for 11 long days. As we held hands for hours, day and night, we laughed and cried, recalling good memories and incredibly sad times. For the first time, I really saw and understood my mom as a 10-year-old girl who watched her own mother with mental illness committed to a psychiatric facility. I saw more than a housewife, a loving mother and grandmother, a devoted wife for 60 years who had mourned the death of her beloved Pete for every minute of every day for 5 years. I saw a smart, religious, strong, and determined woman who loved her family so unconditionally she wanted her children and adult grandchildren to remember her as a woman who taught us all how to die with dignity, not a woman kept alive by artificial means for weeks, months, or years. Yes, it took 11 agonizing days as my family and I watched our mother and grandmother starve to death. When the end finally came, my daughter and I were holding her hands. I can tell you from experience, forcing a person and their loved ones to live through that kind of torture is not anything we should be proud of as a society. I truly hope none of you have to go through it. To this day, I still miss my parents. I'm not going to presume that my dad, a devout Irish Catholic, or my mom, an equally devout Methodist, would have chosen to ask for medical aid in dying at the end. But I am certain they should have had the ability to choose their own destiny. And I desperately want the ability to choose my own destiny. Thank you for your time.